Individuals, businesses, and municipalities minimize waste. This presentation will look at how your household can divert kitchen and yard materials from the garbage to the soil. During this presentation, we will look at the following topic areas: why composting is important, other options for handling compostable materials, how a compost pile works, how to start a compost pile, maintenance tips, compost bins, and using finished compost. Compost is the dark, crumbly, earthy-smelling material that results from the breakdown of living things. Mature compost is also called humus. Materials that can be returned to the soil are valuable resources. Because the organic part of soil gets used up over time and needs to be replenished, adding compost to soil also improves its structure, meaning that the soil particles stick together better. Compost improves soil's air and water holding capacity and acts as a low-level, slow-release fertilizer. In natural systems like a forest, dead plants and animals decay and replenish the soil with nutrients for living plants to use. In human systems, many materials that could be used to enrich the soil end up as garbage. Food scraps, green plant material, dry leaves, and wood make up about 1/3 of the total garbage over the course of a year. In the summer months, these things can account for 50% of the waste going to landfills. These materials are easy to remove from the waste stream, as people living in houses can look after most of them right in their own backyards and improve the soil in their gardens, flower beds, and lawns. Removing food materials, yard waste, and wood from the landfill is a good idea. It means that the landfill site will last longer, and long-term problems with methane gas and leachate can be avoided. When there is nothing to eat, rodents don't find landfill sites as attractive. Backyard composting is an important part of the strategy for removing these materials from the landfills. There are a lot of different ways to add plant and food materials back into the soil. Most people use formal composting as only one of several strategies. Let's have a look at the options. Leaving grass clippings on the lawn is a perfectly acceptable way to manage them. They add fertility and do not encourage thatch. A mulching mower is a good idea if you are purchasing new equipment. If you are re-landscaping, consider plans that minimize lawn area, where the lawn has been replaced by drought-tolerant trees, shrubs, and perennials. The process of tilling leaves and other materials directly into the soil is called sheet composting. It is best to do this in the fall, so that the decay process is well advanced before planting next spring. Mulch is a layer of material on top of the soil that slows evaporation, discourages weeds, and protects against temperature extremes. A 4-inch layer of leaves makes a good mulch. In Saskatchewan, it's best to apply mulch around annual plants after the soil is warm and they are well established. Water will penetrate more easily if the leaves are shredded with a lawnmower or a shredder. A 3 to 4-inch layer of grass clippings also makes a good mulch. Avoid using clippings that have had herbicide applied within the last month. Small tree branches, up to about 2 inches in diameter, can be turned into wood chips with small-scale shredders. Wood chips make good, long-lasting mulches around shrubbery and trees. Shredders are fairly expensive to buy and can be dangerous, but you may be able to rent one or find someone to do shredding for a fee. Homeowners usually have a variety of other wood scraps to handle. Larger tree branches can be processed for firewood, while dimension lumber scraps can be used for small construction projects, such as a compost bin. Elm wood needs special treatment to avoid the spread of Dutch elm disease by bark beetles, so contact your community officials for information on proper handling. Trench composting is an organized way of burying food scraps in the garden. The scraps should be covered with several inches of topsoil, with the trenches lined between rows or in fallow portions of the garden. A wide range of food scraps can also be processed indoors with red wiggler worms. You can get more information on worm composting from the Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council. If you live in the country and raise livestock, You have the option of feeding food scraps to chickens or pigs. Later, their manure can be used as fertilizer. The final option we'll discuss is composting in piles or bins. Formal composting requires a little more effort than some of the other methods we've mentioned, but it has some definite advantages. Compost allows you to handle many materials in one system. The finished compost can be moved to where you wish to use it and is less restricted by season than sheet or trench composting. All the options we've described are good ways to return food and yard wastes to the soil. Many people use a combination of approaches, but formal composting is usually part of the mix because of the advantages we've just listed. Composting goes more smoothly if you understand the process. Sharing that understanding with children can help knowledge pass from one generation to another. The rest of this video explains how the composting process works and how to make and use compost. Compost is made by mixing moist organic materials in piles or in bins. The process is finished when the materials are dark, crumbly, and unrecognizable. The process takes about 3 months in warm weather. The composting process is all about eating, with the most important eaters being bacteria and fungi. They're also called microbes because you need a microscope to see them. The compost pile is both a place to live and a food source for these organisms. The microbes are already on the composting materials, but the success of the compost process depends on how well their needs are met. One of the first needs is a balanced diet. Microbes like lots of high-carbon browns, such as dry leaves, dry grass, and straw. And they need some high nitrogen greens, including green plants, food scraps, and manure. The leaves, dry grass, dead plants, and straw shown here are the browns available to most compost makers. The microbes need these high-carbon materials to meet their energy needs. Browns break down very slowly on their own, store well, and can be added to the compost as needed. Wood chips and paper products are very high-carbon materials that are slow to decompose, but can be used when no other browns are available. Green grass, fresh plant material, and food scraps are the high nitrogen greens commonly available to the home composter. The bacteria need access to this nitrogen if they're going to thrive. Greens tend to decompose quickly, but cause a lot of odor problems if composted alone. They do not store well and should be mixed with browns and composted immediately. Alfalfa hay and farm animal manure are excellent sources of nitrogen for your compost if they're available. Small additions of high nitrogen fertilizers can also be used. 2 parts green to 3 parts brown is a mix that generally suits the microbes' tastes. Microbes chew with enzymes instead of teeth, so they can only eat when the materials are moist. Microbes also use moisture to move around and prefer a compost mix that is about as wet as a damp sponge. This is a very important issue on the prairies, where compost piles can dry out quickly. Check the moisture level of your compost pile regularly in the warm months, and add water if needed. Bacteria are the main microbes at work in your compost pile in the early stages of decomposition. They work more effectively when they have access to air. Air can be added to a pile by turning or mixing the materials. When bacteria have food, water, and air, they break things down quickly and create heat and odorless gas. This is the type of decomposition you want in your compost pile. Compost piles can reach about 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius. This is hot enough to kill weed seeds, but if your compost pile doesn't get that warm, don't worry, as decomposition will still take place. When compost piles run out of air, the bacteria keep working, but they have to use a different approach, and the byproducts are not welcome. Rotten egg gas or hydrogen sulfide is one of the several smelly signs that oxygen is not available. Little heat is generated by this process, and weed seeds generally survive. Although hydrogen sulfide is a poisonous gas if it collects in a confined space, it's not usually an issue with outdoor composting. Chopping up materials lets the microbes work much faster. Garden shears and sharp spades are common hand tools used to chop materials, and if you have one, a machete is a great chopping tool. Shredders are a good way to chop a variety of materials, but they're expensive to buy. So look for someone in your community who does custom shredding. It's also possible to shred your leaves with a lawnmower. It is useful to add a small amount of topsoil to compost piles, as the soil helps limit odor problems and adds more microbes to the mix. Compost bins or piles should be at least a cubic meter in size. Piles smaller than this won't hold their heat, dry out faster, and will take longer to break down. In summary, in order for everything to work right, composting needs microbes, browns and greens, water, oxygen, and soil. Composting benefits from chopped materials and at least a cubic meter of materials. Now that you know the elements of composting, let's look at how to put together a compost pile. It is easiest to start a compost pile in the spring or the fall. Compost can be made into open piles or bins, and fresh materials are added at the top for about a year. Then the finished compost is harvested from the bottom. Our demonstration pile is being made on a tarp so that you can see it more easily. Here we see some stocky materials being used at the bottom of the pile. Most piles are not turned thoroughly, and these bulkier materials help with aeration. A layer of greens is placed on top of the base layer. A small amount of soil or finished compost is added. A layer of browns, slightly larger than the green layer, is added to the pile, and a fork is used to mix the two layers. Building by layers makes measuring easier, but then the different kinds of materials need to be mixed so that the microbes have access to both kinds of food. Add water at intervals as you build a pile, and keep adding materials until you've used up all the greens. After your pile is started, continue to add nitrogen-rich greens like food scraps as they become available. And always cover kitchen scraps with leaves or other browns to balance the mix and to avoid insect problems. Avoid adding fats and oils as they are hard for bacteria to break down. Avoid adding meat since it creates odors and attracts animals. Avoid adding bones as they don't break down and also attract animals. It is also good to avoid adding large amounts of dairy products. Many of them are high in fat, and they all attract animals to the compost site. Other items to avoid are dog or cat manure, as it may have parasites, weeds with mature seeds that may persist if not heated thoroughly, and diseased plants that may spread disease. Kitchen scraps can be collected in a small lidded pail that is either kept on the kitchen counter or in another convenient spot. Lining the bottom with a piece of newsprint reduces odors and speeds cleanup, and the newsprint can be added to the compost pile. This picture shows a tidy setup where the garbage can and the compost bucket are both attached to the inside of the cabinet doors under the sink. High carbon browns store well and can be kept on hand to add to the greens as the